Now, meanwhile, as Israel's election saga continues, so does the voting in Britain. And Jews in the United Kingdom are equally on edge as the controversial UK Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn inches closer to the office in 10 Downing Street. Well, here now with more is public affairs consultant Jodie Cohen. Jodie, thank you so much for being with us today. Tell us a little bit about the party leaders here who are vying to be Prime Minister in the UK right now.
Well, a poll yesterday that came out actually as the first seat predictions, they said that they're expecting a Conservative majority of 48 in the House of Commons, which would give the Conservatives 349 seats and a clear majority, compared to Labour, which is headed by Jeremy Corbyn, which is expected to get 213, and the Liberal Democrats are expected to go down to 14, and then the Scottish National Party up to 49. So some changes there. Good news for Boris Johnson. If he gets a clear majority, he said he's going to deliver a Brexit deal by Christmas. And we have to also remember that in the lead up to the 2017 elections, there was a big majority expected for the Conservatives, but then Jeremy Corbyn managed to narrow that gap in the last 2 weeks. If that happens, we could look at a hung parliament, we could look at extensions to Brexit, and a second referendum.
Well, so how does all of this then work with respect to the Jews of the UK? How are they feeling about all this, all that's going on right now in London? And then how does that then relate to maybe the UK's foreign policy with Israel?
So we know that 40% of Jews over the last year or so have been talking about considering emigrating if Jeremy Corbyn becomes Prime Minister, which is really serious and unprecedented.
Massive number, yeah.
Over the weekend, we saw the party manifestos of the three main parties being published, the Conservatives, Labour and Liberal Democrats. And I've had a look at each of these and sort of identified three key issues that is of concern to Israel. The first one being recognition of a Palestinian state. The Conservatives have a 60-page manifesto and a very, very brief reference to recognising a two-state solution for the Middle East.
But does it allow for the parties on the ground to negotiate, or does it have any sort of ideology of what that should look like from London's perspective?
So from Prime Minister Johnson's perspective, it's a very UK-focused manifesto. It doesn't go into detail at all. So it's not even a full sentence and doesn't even say...
So it lets the parties basically deal... Okay.
Labour is a very different story. Labour says that they would immediately recognise a Palestinian state.
Unilaterally?
Yeah,
just like that. Okay.
Absolutely. And we know that from the Labour Party conference back in September, the conference voted to recognise the right of return to Palestinian refugees to Israel. And then the Liberal Democrats as well say that they would recognise a Palestinian state, although they don't say immediately like Labour.
I see.
Then looking to the second issue, which is trade with Israel. So the Conservatives obviously want to find free trade agreements with the world after Brexit. It doesn't go into further detail than that. Labour, again, talk about immediately ending arms sales to Israel and Saudi Arabia. And we know from the party conference that they're in favour of a boycott as well. And the Liberal Democrats talk about banning arms sales to Saudi Arabia, but don't mention Israel and want to be part of the EU, so would trade with Israel as part of the EU. And then the final issue I identified is obviously Iran. The Conservative manifesto doesn't say anything about Iran.
Wow.
Absolutely nothing. But we know in September, Boris Johnson talked about the Iran agreement being a bad deal.
Of course.
The Labour Party and the Liberal Democrat Party, their manifestos both talk about returning to negotiations and reviving the deal with Iran.
All right, well, UK voters certainly have a lot to think about going into this election. Jodie, thank you so much for being with us today.
No problem.